the Giant Sword, Terminator, and Valkyrie. These are undeniably some of the highest tier weapons in Hypixel Skyblock. With the new update to Berserk, and the addition of new weapons and lots of new items, choosing what weapon you want to use has never been more difficult. With the changes and new weapons, of course, some items are going to be left behind. For example, the price of the Giant Sword has completely and utterly fell through the floor. As of recording this video earlier today, I held a poll on my channel. I asked, do you use the Giant Sword? And if you don't, why not? 18% of people use the Giant Sword, and 82% of people don't. Some people can't afford it, some people are Iron Man, but the general consensus for the majority of people is the fact that there's weapons that rival it for much cheaper. However, we're not going to be talking about the Giant Sword today. The Giant Sword was never intended to be a Berserk weapon, and it still dropped through the floor after a Berserk update. Today we take a look at by far one of the biggest missed opportunities in Skyblock history by a country mile. This weapon is of course the Valkyrie. The Valkyrie's base stats are as followed: plus 270 damage, plus 145 strength, plus 60 intelligence, and plus 60 ferocity. Just like the Hyperion, the Valkyrie is a Necron's blade. Of course, you surround the Necron's blade with diamantes handles rather than laser eyes. If you think in terms of mage, what is the best mage weapon? And it is by far a Hyperion, and no one can deny that. That is what it is. In terms of the best Berserk weapon, the Valkyrie just isn't. The Valkyrie isn't the best Berserk weapon, and it should be. And my question is, why is it not? I mean, it's got a very simple answer, and that's because just look at the stats of the item. It's not really anything too overwhelming. But why? Why does it have to be that way? We've just had a massive Berserk update, and you've not updated what should be the best Berserk weapon by far. If we take a look at the base stats of a Felthorn Reaper, which at the moment is 67 million coins, we have plus 285 damage. The Valkyrie has plus 270, so that's less. It has plus 10 strength, whereas the Valkyrie has plus 145 strength. We've got plus 125 crit damage, and the Valkyrie doesn't give you any crit damage, which I think is really strange considering realistically it's supposed to be the best Berserk weapon in the game, otherwise what is it for? The Felthorn Reaper also gives you plus 1.5 swing range, whereas the Valkyrie gives you plus 60 intelligence, which isn't really needed on this weapon, and it also gives you plus 60 ferocity, which is probably the best perk that it has. However, when we take a look at these two weapons, of course we have to factor in the Felthorn Reaper's right click ability too, which is great. This weapon is 67 million coins at base. If we pick a pretty decent one with Soul Eater 5 and everything that you'd want on there, that's going to set you probably between 110 to 120 million. Now, as for the Valkyrie, number one, there's only 3 on the market, and that's because nobody uses a Valkyrie. And number 2, the cheapest one on the market is almost 1 billion coins. Now, of course, if you wanted to buy this Valkyrie, you could quite simply turn it into another with a blade. Of course, you'd also need to do a lot to it, so it would kind of be a little bit costly. However, the more that I look at this weapon, and I've used it in the past, just the more and more confused I get. Even if we take a look at something like a Dark Claymore, which is giving us way more damage, it's giving us less strength, it's giving us more crit damage, and it's giving us plus 2 swing range, that's only 450 mil. Now, before we do go any further, make sure to use code NITROS if you are planning on purchasing anything from the Hypixel store. It gets yourself 5% off. You should also subscribe to the channel, it does help out a lot. And you should join the Discord server, it's linked in the description of this video. I understand that, if you buy Valkyrie, you essentially have a Hyperion just minus the laser eyes. And that's the reason why it's so expensive. However, why is the Valkyrie not the best Berserk weapon on the game? Why is it not changed? Why is it not buffed? I mean, I just think it's a huge missed opportunity. And I'd love to see that weapon actually be properly usable. Don't get me wrong, it would now be usable, but who's going to pay 1 billion coins for that weapon when they could pay 150 mil for a maxed out Felthorn Reaper? That's not really going to be much worse at all, maybe even slightly better. Now, the only real sort of success I've ever had with a Valkyrie was going for a full ferocity build using Dirty on the Valkyrie, getting Fatal Tempo on there, and maximising ferocity with other things like enrichments, pets and so on. I think I ended up with something like 230 ferocity, which meant that I could kill things extremely quickly. In reality though, it's not the most practical setup, and to be completely honest, I was just clutching at straws, wanting that weapon to be good. Honestly, the most annoying thing about this weapon is it's never really been properly meta. Back when it was first released, people used it, and obviously that's just faded away over time. But the only reason people used it is because there wasn't as many better weapons. For instance, like back when the Necron's Blade was first introduced, the Terminator didn't exist, which made Berserk way more viable. And at that time, weapons like the Dark Claymore that we now see people using for Berserk, which to me is crazy considering it's not even a Berserk weapon. But obviously because of the swing range, it makes it much better. Now, to make this weapon really, really worth the coins, I personally think its base damage needs to be upped to probably maybe at least 400. You look at the Dark Claymore, that base damage is over 500, and it also has similar strength. I don't understand why it doesn't give crit damage. It should give crit damage. Maybe replace the strength with crit damage and make it higher, maybe like 200. Ferocity is a nice perk to have. Intelligence isn't really relevant at all. And also, give it like a +2 or maybe a 2.5 swing range to make it better than the Claymore, as it should be, because it is supposed to be the best weapon for Berserk in the game. I mean, if that isn't its intended purpose, then why is it here? So if they upped the damage, maybe up to 500, or maybe even a little bit more than 500, maybe to 550, replace the strength with crit damage, and then give it a 2.5 swing range, you'll be dealing with a weapon that would actually be worth paying basically the price. It would become meta, and it would basically give people a reason to buy it and use it, which I think would be really good for the game personally. At the moment, it's really strange because the Dark Claymore, which isn't even a Berserk weapon, is probably the best weapon for Berserk, and even that is massively cheaper than the Valkyrie. Now, something that would be really interesting is, considering that the Valkyrie is Necron's Blade, if there was a new scroll introduced into the game or something along those lines which is actually specific to Berserk or melee damage. Considering at the moment, realistically, to use a Valkyrie, you don't need any scrolls on it at all. Of course, the natural progression from the rest of the game doesn't really transfer over to Berserk, considering the Necron's Blade variant just isn't good, at least for the price. But maybe there's somebody out there that has found a use for this weapon. They've found a way to make it consistently good and practical. Well, if that's you, please let me know in the comments how to do that, because I would be very, very interested. And honestly, the fact that when you look on the auction house, you go to Hyperions and you see a ton of them, and you go to Valkyries and you consistently see maybe between 2 and 5, it kind of really does speak for itself. Nobody really uses this weapon, and it's kind of sad. It just feels like an update goes by, and this weapon is just completely and utterly forgotten about by the people who put it in the game. And now will be a perfect time to buff the weapon, considering the Berserk update has just dropped. Anyway, if you did enjoy today's video, make sure you do leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next one.